on this very important subject of how can residents get involved and have more say. We've been taking evidence so far about what happens in Hammersmith and Fulham, and now we're going to have witnesses who are going to tell us what happens elsewhere. And I am delighted to welcome Kate Dodsworth from Amicus Horizon, Lee Page from Southwark, and Tina Barnard, who we've already met as a group when we visited the Watford Community Housing Trust several weeks ago to these proceedings. Let me say that we're immensely grateful to you for taking time out and finding your way to this particular neck of the woods here in Hammersmith and Fulham. And I'm going to invite you to say a little a word about yourself and your organisations before we go to the questions. So why don't we begin with you, Kate?
Thank you very much. I'm Exec Director of People and Strategy at Amicus Horizon. We have about 28,000 homes. We're based in Croydon. We have stock in Sussex and in Kent. We're the product of 3 stock transfers, essentially. And I would say our unique selling point at Amicus Horizon is our resident involvement. It's one of the things that we take massively seriously, and in fact we credit our resident involvement with our turnaround. We were in a bad place about 8 years ago, we were in supervision, and now we've got the top resident satisfaction of a large landlord.
Yes, good evening. My name's Lee Page. I'm the manager of the tenant management team for Southwark Council. We're the largest landlord in London. We've got over 50,000 homes in the borough. And I'm not directly involved with the resident involvement team. I deal with tenant management organisations, which are companies set up by residents to provide their own housing management services and other things as well, of which we have, or will shortly have, 15 in Southwark. They will cover just over 4,300 homes, or about 8% of our stock. And I think we're generally acknowledged probably to be the best borough in the country for tenant management. We've just won the award for that for the 3rd year running from the National Federation of TMOs.
Thank you. I'm Tina Barnard. I'm Chief Exec of Watford Community Housing Trust, and it was very nice to see the Resident Commission earlier this year. Watford Community Housing Trust is small but perfectly formed. We have around 5,000 homes. We transferred from Watford Council 8 years this September, and we are the first community gateway organisation in the south. There are only 4 of us, and we're all first in some respects. In terms of the fact that a community gateway, it means that we are 100% owned by our tenants and members. And I know next time you're going to be talking about models, but it's quite useful to know the position that we are in. Thanks.
Thank you all very much indeed. Let me say that I'm going to ask my colleagues to put questions to you. None of them are specifically directed at one or other witness or organisation, and obviously we'd be pleased to hear from all of you. The only thing I would say is that obviously we're operating under some constraints, so I think both from the questions and from the answers we need a certain amount of brevity. So I begin with Matthias. I think you have a question, Matthias.
Yes, thanks so much, our external witnesses. The Commission would like to find out what value organisation places on resident involvement, and what do you do to promote and support resident involvement, and would appreciate if you can give us some numbers to benchmark what other work we are working on. Thanks so much.
Okay, well I've already answered some of this in the introduction. So for Amicus Horizon it's massively important, and that's on a number of levels. We have 4 resident places on the board, we have a residents council, we have 8 area panels, repairs and maintenance panels, a whole level of ways that residents get involved, right through to the informal, the focus groups, scrutiny groups, policy task force groups, you name it, we've got it. We encourage our residents to get involved right from start up. We have leaflets like this to encourage people to get involved with us. We go out every year in the summer to all our estates for residents' assemblies, put on a dog show, whatever it is that gets people interested, and then get them in, get people involved. You asked for numbers. In the formal resident governance structure, we have around 60 residents involved, and that's on our resident council, the board, the repairs and maintenance panels, the area panels, but we have hundreds involved in informal ways. I'm going to pass it on if I may, because I figure you'll go down into the detail later.
Okay, briefly on two things. As I say, we've got 15 tenant management organisations. Each has a committee of residents, between 8 to 10 on each committee, so you can work out the numbers from that. In our wider resident involvement structure, we have 126 tenant and residents associations across our stock. We have 10 area housing forums, which then feed into both a homeowner council and a tenant council, which are the senior resident bodies, both of whom control a substantial amount of money in terms of funding. Our homeowner council has a budget of £146,000 a year, which is £10 per homeowner per annum, which comes from the admin charge we levy on the service charges. Our tenant fund has, this year's budget is approximately £550,000, which works out at 27.5 pence per tenant per week. I don't know where those figures originated from. They are lost in the dim mists of time, but it gives them a substantial amount of funds, and from that the tenant fund funds our federation of called Southwark Group of Tenant Organisations, and that is another representative body. So in terms of the structure, we have TRAs, they nominate to both of the senior bodies, and policies go through that as well.
At the highest level, we have our membership, which at the moment stands at around 3,000 people, so that's equivalent to around 43% of our tenant and leaseholder base. Like Amicus Horizon, we also have tenants on our board, and at the moment that's 30% tenants. We have in our rules the tenant and leaseholder group called our Gateway Membership Team, and that consists of 12 tenants. Like yourselves, we have TRAs. We have in Watford 21 local community areas, and of that 70%, sort of 13, 14 have TRAs, and we have an umbrella organisation called the Community Action Group, where people all work together on that, and that's probably around 25-30 people. We involve tenants on one-off projects, so that would be our procurement for our improvement programme, the purchase of our house. When we transferred, we had a large fund called the Better Communities Fund, and that's now evolved into Community Development Fund. And by working in each of the local community areas on option studies, we involve tenants there as well.
Could I just ask Kate, you have your 9 area panels with 12 members. Are those members elected?
Yes, they are elected, all residents, and they also have a liaison from the board. I think that's an important point to make, that our strategic board that sits above it, every member has a role to play on those area panels, so the communication is constantly there.
And you have your residents' council, which is
Yes.
18 people, which has an advisory role, I think it would be correct to say. Is that elected?
Yes, that's elected. Advisory role, sounding board, and then we always have the chair and vice chair of the residents' council at every strategic board member meeting.
And the 4 members who are residents of your board, are they elected as well?
For the residents who are on the board, yes, they are.
They are elected. Who
Yes.
are they elected by?
Or they actually go to an interview and get the job.
So they're not elected.
Sorry, there's an interview panel for them.
So they're, as it were, co-opted,
Yes.
but not elected?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Let me think. Anthony,
Similar questions to the ones we asked the officers. You've already described the opportunities for involvement. Can you tell us what the levels are of take-up, and are you able to describe the profile of your involved residents?
Should I kick off? I did a little bit of digging around on this beforehand because I knew one of the questions that you would ask would be about age. It seems to be the common theme. And at the moment, we have around 40% of our involved residents are over 60. So we have a slight disproportion of older members. We're doing quite well, I think, on younger members, and we're doing quite a few things to make sure we get younger members through. We have youth forums in each of our 3 regions to make sure that we've got young people involved. They're obviously doing sort of informal stuff, but coming through. We've just made a new rule with our governance review that we will allow people in a household who are not necessarily the named tenant to come onto the area panel. And we think that's really important. So if you've got the named tenant and their grown-up child wants to be involved, then that's brilliant. We've just started a new committee underneath our board, the Customer Experience Committee, and we're opening that up to a third of our residents as well, and hoping that we get some new blood, as it were, involved for the board. So that's a little bit about the age profile, and I've said a bit about the take-up already.
We don't have exact figures for the tenant management organisations as to the age profile. Generally, it is the older demographic who are involved, but we get a lot of other community sections of the community involved through different ways. We have a range of alternative methods of involvement and little clubs and things that are run through the TMOs. These run from food growing and gardening. We've got a knitting club. We've got a local history group. We've got a sculpture group. We've just had our 3rd year of community sculptures, and we've got one on display on one of our estates it's in the shadow of the Shard, and it's called the Shed, because it was a community sharing their skills to build it. And so there are a range of things. We're engaging a lot with the younger community on one of our TMOs through a community football scheme, which is actually being run by a resident from the neighbouring estate, which is run by the Peabody. But we have a football pitch on our estate, and he uses that, and it's now almost outgrown the estate, which is about 450 properties. So we're getting huge numbers through that. So there are a range of different ways in which people are becoming involved, but I have to say we don't have the actual figures.
Our position is probably very similar to Daniel's in terms of it really depends where people are getting involved. So in our membership, we see a whole split across the whole of our tenant and leaseholder base. In terms of the Gateway membership team, we had a situation about 3 or 4 years ago where we had predominantly white older women, and it became dysfunctional. So there was a root and branch review of the Gateway, and now we've got a situation, we've got a much more diverse age and ethnicity. We do struggle to get men involved, and I don't know if there's so many women involved in the trust that we put them off, but that's probably the area that we struggle with. We looked at getting involved younger people, and we set up a youth gateway, but actually we found that wasn't our skill set. And a better way of involving young people was to work with the YMCA, because they've actually got youth the expertise. Again, I think it's something that Daniel was saying, and also I loved the tenant, Tanisha. I would love her to come and live in Watford. She was just absolutely fantastic. It's all about, for our tenants, what's in it for me. And I know that's going to probably be something you're going to ask about later, but people get frustrated if they don't think it adds any value. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about how does this add value, and therefore what kind of people are we going to attract.
Do you have any experience of involving residents from dispersed or non-estate properties referred to earlier on as street properties?
I think the way that we've involved people, because we have these 21 local community areas, some of them are very much, ex-council estates, but some of them are local areas, sort of like Vicarage, where Watford Football Club works. And actually, again, it goes back to what's in it for me, and we've been developing option studies for each of the area. So engaging with local people in terms of how would where you live be better, and what can we do? We know we can't do it on our own, and a lot of things we don't have control over, but working with the local authority, working with some partners in that area, we can utilise some of our money to make a difference. And again, if people see that it adds value, they want to get engaged.
There are two models that I can think of. For our homeowners council, which covers the whole borough, we have 3 groups who are directly elected to that, one of which is for street properties. So we go through an election process whereby we write to all of our street property homeowners, and we have 7,000 street properties in the borough. We invite them to nominate themselves if they're interested in standing to the homeowner council. And from those who are interested, we then conduct an election. We send out an election form, so we get a photo and a brief bit about each person who wants to stand, and send it out to that group and ask them to vote for who they want to come in. The other thing I've seen is from a past role when I worked for Kensington and Chelsea Council, where when I was there, and they may well have changed this in the 15 years since I've been gone, they had 8 areas in a fairly small geographical area. It's not a big borough. Within that, if you weren't part of an established tenant and residents association, they created a group to pick up everybody else. And so they then facilitated the contact with the people in that area who weren't part of an established TRA, and got them to come together in a local room, hall, and elect representatives for that area. I think that has great benefits because you have a relationship with your local area. The problem that homeowners have said to us in Southwark about the election process is they're not aligned with a local area, and they would like to be, but we haven't got numbers coming forward to be able to do that at the present, but maybe one day.
Yeah, very quick answer. Thank you, Paul. I think we do have a street property group, but I'm not going to say for definite. I'm pretty sure we do. But the one thing that springs to mind is that we do have people in street properties who are both on our board and at residents' council. And the one thing that is really, really important to them, obviously, is repairs and maintenance. It's not just about estates and neighbourhoods. That's massively important. So that's a real thing to get people involved.
That's fine.
Could I just go back to a reference that Lee made in relation to Southwark? I mean, Southwark's very interesting because Southwark is a council which always stood out for direct local authority control of housing. Never went in the direction of an ALMO or anything of that sort. And obviously, although we as a commission for the future are looking at the stock transfer model as a possibility, which is why we're extremely interested in Community Gateway and also in Amicus. Obviously, the alternative possibility is retention and remaining with the status quo. And in that context, we have to think about how we achieve greater participation and the exertion of resident influence in decision-making process. You talked about a homeowners council in Southwark. How does that work, Lee?
Historically, there's been something of a clash between tenants and homeowners. Or at least this is what I've picked up since I've been there. It's strange because coming in you see that the concerns are largely the same thing. It's about cost of repairs, the fact that repairs do or don't get done, about communities. There's a lot of crossover, but it seems sometimes the groups involved don't quite see that. And so the homeowners have said that they wanted their own forum to discuss and look at issues pertaining to them and them alone. So a lot of that will revolve around service charges. It will also, of course, cover major works and investment programs, either being done or not done, or being done well or not well. So it covers that sort of range.
So the homeowners council is what elsewhere might be described as leaseholders council.
Yes, we just don't use the term leaseholder, we use homeowner, because we also have freeholders who pay service charges.
And you also presumably have a tenants council, which is overarching and applies to the whole borough as well.
We do, yeah.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Andy, I think you wanted to come in.
Hi there. Hello. You've mentioned about how you use engagement and involvement opportunities, and I love the way that you said we just go out and get them. But my question is, which brings all that together, is what difference have you found that resident involvement actually makes to your organisations and its achievements?
Very easily, in 2008 we were in regulatory supervision. Our customer satisfaction was around 58%, which was lamentable. It's now 98%, and we are absolutely adamant that it's resident involvement that's turned that round. That was one of the things that we set out to do. We've just had a research report done with Westminster University and funded by DCLG, success, satisfaction, scrutiny, that charts our move really to success and puts resident involvement at the heart of it. And the essence of it is the more you involve residents to shape services, the greater your satisfaction, and yes, you can lower costs. Because that is one of the things that people will throw at it, oh, it's expensive, bouncy castles, or you don't want to do it. We absolutely disagree. So that's a bit of a left field answer, but we're evangelical about it.
Can I also recommend that report, because it's a fascinating report, and both Amicus Horizon and one of our TMOs, the Leather Market Joint Management Board, were part of a project called Tenants Leading Change, initiated by the former Communities Minister, which was to make the business case for resident involvement. Now, personally, I thought we'd made that case 20 years ago, but it seems not. We have to go through it again. But I would echo it also, it makes a huge difference. Because if we look at the involved residents through tenant management organisations and we look at the satisfaction results that we get, directly managed stock in Southwark is running at 62 to 65% and has done for the past 7 years. TMO satisfaction, so it's the same estates in the same borough, is running at 76 to 78%, which is a huge difference. And they do it cheaper, because tenant management organisations are only given the budget that we would have spent as a council on providing the services that they're now providing. They invariably make savings every year, which they then reinvest in the property. So it's almost a virtuous circle. There is less disrepair because they've got the money to invest, and they're doing that through involving residents. And I've got a ton of anecdotal stories of how that manifests itself, which I won't bore you with now, but it is the truth. They do it cheaper. Many people think they get more money for providing services. Absolutely not. They get the same amount, they just do it better and they do it cheaper.
I would echo both Kate and Lee's point about services, but I would also bring the point about the passion and the strength that tenants, talking to tenants, as a professional, we can never engage with them. You know, I'm the chief exec, I get paid to work at the trust, and when I say something, hopefully people do believe me because I am telling them the truth. But, you know, having residents involved with that and then talking about the services, talking about the organisation and seeing the difference to their lives, actually Yes, of course it means increased satisfaction, but it actually helps the community as a whole. At the Trust, our vision is better homes, friendlier communities together. So it's not just about the services, it is about that wider remit, the wider environment. And okay, it's leaf-free Hertfordshire, but people are happy to live in Watford and Three Rivers, and I think that is about that conversation that the tenants have there and get involved with.
Hi. From the perspective of each of your different types of organisations and the experience that you have, can you tell us what you think are the key factors that contribute to making resident involvement effective in 3 ways, from the residents themselves, in terms of service delivery and service design on an ongoing basis, and also from the business perspective?
Okay, I'll have a first stab at this. I think from our experience, one of the tips has been, from the business point of view, keep resident involvement co-located with governance. So keep the board and involve residents very closely together, and the staff that operate that closely together. I think our biggest lesson has been get residents to tell you what is important to them and go at it relentlessly. So for us, it's antisocial behaviour, dealing with complaints, turning around relets quickly, and repairs. Cut out everything else. Just don't worry about everything. Just do what residents find important and go at it. I think from involving residents themselves, from their perspective, we always say training, don't we? And we always say good induction, but actually mean it and do it and keep it consistent. And if people need a buddy, then that's great too. Certainly our resident board members have got other board members as buddies. And as I said, there's the liaison between strategic board and panel. So we talk about operating as one team, our residents, our staff and our board. And that's the ethos that we stick to. So sorry, it's a bit mixed up, but I've tried to address most of them.
There's a range of things here. I think from a landlord's perspective, you need to give appropriate levels of support. For tenant management organisations, I've probably got the best resource team in the country, and we are the best. Well, it works together, because if you set something up and just leave it to go, it's going to fall over without appropriate support, because there are going to be times which are challenging and which make it difficult for them to keep operating. And that's where we step in a firm but friendly way, shall we say. But we will occasionally shut a tenant management organisation down if its governance is beyond repair, or we will put it into supervision and rebuild it and set it free again, and so on. I mean, you've got to resource it. For me, that's the big thing, is the support that you give to them. And then you can watch the whole organisation flourish, because it will.
In terms of residents, I think I've already talked about this, but it is about what's in it for me, so people understand that. I do think it's about communication, because people's perception is, it is an inner club, so it is making sure that everybody actually talks about resident involvement. I mean, we actually talk about community empowerment because we think it's more than just our residents and our tenants and leaseholders. So I think that's important. It is about making sure that you've got the resources to build capacity. You're not going to suddenly parachute somebody into a chief exec's job without them being clear what their role is and what they're supposed to do. And sometimes we suddenly parachute in residents and say, go on, get on with it. So it is that clarity about resources. In terms of the service improvement area, I think it's, again, the communication side, but it's about making sure that realistic about timescales and the resources you've got in place, and also doing you said we did. So going back and saying to people, this is what you said and this is what we've done, and then keep on returning that. And in terms of the business, it is making sure it's at the heart of the organisation. So as a community gateway, as I said, we expect all of our staff to be involved with the community empowerment.
Peter, I think you've got a supplementary and then Shirley.
It was specifically for Lee, if I may, which was to ask, sorry, is that better? Lee, do you ever have to convince your elected members of the value of resident involvement, and what's their take on it?
No is a simple answer. And I've worked in authorities from various different political persuasions, and it's pretty constant, actually, that they don't need to be convinced. Now, I could be really cynical about this, because I've always taken the line that if people are more satisfied and happy where they live, they're more likely to vote for the incumbent. So I think it's a bit of self-preservation in there somewhere, but that may just be me being a bit cynical about it. But no, it's never really been an issue. They're very, very keen. In fact, we're doing a project at the moment, which I was going to touch on later, but we're creating 2 areas in Southwark where we're building a new structure from the bottom up by asking the residents, how do you want the services delivered here? What control do you want over those services? And I'm in the strange position that, having had the initial round of consultation with residents in those areas, I think I'm going to have to pull the members back, because the residents there aren't asking for as much as the politicians want to give them. Interesting.
Yes, thank you. I'm interested in where staff are in all of this, because particularly where you've had a change of culture, and Kate, you've talked about moving from a really difficult place to a good place, and that residents' involvement has been part of that. So that suggests it's moved from not having much to having a lot, and the others of you may have comments on this as well. What are the benefits for staff? What are the challenges? And what are the challenges for the managers of staff?
You're right there was a massive cultural turnaround, and to make sure that 750 staff are as evangelical about resident involvement as I am, or the senior execs are, is a big step. We've got there, partly because our board is so evangelical about it as well. I think the benefits are, although it takes a little bit of time to get a strategy through, so every customer-facing policy or strategy has to be ratified by our residents' council. It's not worth taking it to board if it hasn't been. The benefit is, you know that you've got a good document there. You know you've got a document there that's going to work. The residents have thought about things that we won't have thought of in a million years. You know it's cost-effective because people are worried about budgets. You know that it's a good product by being there. The challenges are, and I've just alluded to it can take a little bit of time to get something through. But we've just had our governance review, and the steering group was made up predominantly of residents, and we showed them a length of piece of paper on a trestle table, the journey of a strategy. And being sensible, they just went, right, cut it there, cut it there, cut it there, and we'll take out a few processes from the setup. And now we've got a great process, but that's because we involved our residents and cut it down.
So just before you pass on, so that sort of journey, did you change the staff, their attitudes, or did some of the staff change and you brought new people in, or is it a bit of both?
Yeah, I wasn't there. I'm pretty sure it was a bit of both, because I think with any cultural turnaround, if you're going in a different direction, there will be people that want to get off the train. There'll be people that don't like the direction it's going, and we worked with people who, we worked with a company called Theatre And, who worked with residents and staff together. We trained together. We were all very clear about the journey that we were going on. And I think for staff who didn't get it, it was pretty clear by the end of about year one that that was the direction we were going.
Speaking from past experience of being a frontline officer when I started out my housing career back in the 80s, in an organisation which was probably ahead of its time, I think it needs to be led from the top, and you've got evidence of that here today, that if the senior lead officer isn't committed to it, it won't feed its way down through the organisation. And I saw that firsthand, and my chief executive officer at the time called it something he called resident primacy. That the resident is in control here, and we treat them as we do our elected members. And then when I went to work somewhere else, I was really surprised that it wasn't like that everywhere. And I felt a bit, what's wrong with this organisation? And strangely enough, it was an organisation where residents had many more issues with the landlord.
It's always so hard being the third person because people have already said most of the things you were going to say. I think the big thing for me, I would echo everything that Lee and just I got Kate's name fell out of my head, is about the same way for residents, it's for staff what's in it for me. And actually if staff see that it's making their life easier and they're not spending all the time on complaints and arguing with people, then actually they can see that benefit. But quite rightly, as Lee says, it's about coming from the top. It's also about those members of staff that are not engaged with the process, making a decision about whether that's the right organisation that they want to be in.
Actually, can I just add something very, very quickly to that? It reminded me of something in the report. Our relationship moved from combative to sort of co-creation, and that takes an awful lot of time out of it and a lot of angst for staff. So it helped in that way.
It's Johnny next, and I suggest that Tina is the first to answer this one.
Yes, exactly. I was going to say I'm the what's in it for me man, because that's the sort of question I want to ask. It's basically, obviously, to you all, but maybe as you've covered such a lot, perhaps anecdotal would be a good way around this, and it really is just how do you sustain resident involvement? I mean, basically the question is there a role for incentive schemes, or do you have supporting groups and individuals that take on special exercises during the year? But it's basically that. Give us something out of the box that maybe you didn't know that just happened.
If I can take the comment about incentive schemes, this is something that we keep returning to as staff. And our involved tenants say they don't want to have an incentive scheme. What we've had is something very much like the cost of coffee, that you get 6 stamps if you're involved with us 6 times, and then you're actually put into a draw, and then every quarter. And because as a business, one of the things we're really encouraging people is to get online and become, sort of mobile involved. What our incentives at the moment happen to be are tablets. So we can then give people tablets. We've got some training schemes across the organisation, and then when we have that conversation with them, they say, "Oh, it'd be really great if you, every time you're involved with us, you could get, you could use your tablet rather than ringing us, etc." So we're making sure that any of the resident involvement isn't over here, is actually integral to what we as a business want to do. So I think that's the comment I would say in terms of incentive schemes. In terms of sustaining resident involvement, it keeps going back to people get bored if they don't see any outcomes, and that was why I thought you were absolutely fantastic. One of our big new things that is called the Nifty 50s, or the Nifty over 50s. We seem to be talking about age a lot today. And that's about getting people that we weren't engaged with before, but getting them to do things that they wanted to do on their own. And actually it's now a self-sustaining group, and they do a whole range of different things, and that may be going out for a coach party, or it may be getting someone in to talk to them about wills was one of the it's age again. It was about tea and chat, etc. But they actually decide what they want to do, and it's something that's fired people's imagination, because some of our people are, our tenants are isolated, and this is a way they can meet with people. So again, it's tying up with what do people want, rather than trying to impose our own systems in place.
I think that's absolutely right. In terms of incentives for individuals, no, I'm not a fan of them. So, you know, I'm not talking about payment for being involved on a senior level. I don't think that works. Incentivise TRAs generally through devolved budget control, absolutely. We had a scheme I introduced in Wandsworth called the Small Improvement Budget, where we had £300,000 which had usually been set aside for councillors to decide how it was spent when they did estate walkabouts and say, oh, we've got a bit of money, I can get that done for you, and gave it directly to our 3 area forums in the borough. And they came up with the projects, and our technical team assessed them, got the prices and funded it from that. In terms of sustaining it, I think there are 3 things. You need to make it easy to be involved. If people have got to jump through hoops, they're not going to bother. You need to have appropriate structures in place. And what I mean by that is minimal number of groups with a maximum level of control. One of my horrible experiences was when I went to work in Lambeth first time, and they said, why don't you come along, we've got this area meeting where we've got all the contractors in this area who are going to come along, and all the TRAs are going to be there, and we're going to question them. And I said, okay, what time does it start? Oh, about 7 o'clock, fine. And roughly what time are you going to finish? They said, well, the last one finished at midnight. And I just turned around and said, I'm not going. Now I know someone who used to head up the distribution network for B&Q, so, you know, fairly high-powered, who always had a rule of thumb, if a meeting lasts longer than an hour, I walk out. Now, if B&Q can do it on a national distribution, we can question, you know, and we can provide a local houses service in those sort of timescales, as far as I'm concerned. The final thing, what I say, is to echo what's just been said, act on it. If you don't change anything, people will just lose interest and walk away. And if you're trying to set something, give them a quick win. Yeah, so what's the thing? Get it done, and then they've already got credibility with the rest of the residents who might pull a few more people in.
Yeah, very quickly, how do you sustain it? I think grown-up conversations give people the right statistics and data to interrogate, and then allow people to see the results going in the right direction. I think that's how you sustain resident involvement, because it has to be about trust, and if, as the others have said, if people don't see the results, then why would you be involved? Incentive schemes, no, we haven't got involved with giving cash prizes or anything else, but we are working up a model where our involved residents may go for professional qualifications with the Chartered Institute of Housing and something like that. We've always done training with our residents, our staff and residents train together on a lot of courses, and we're really interested in how our involved residents might professionalise.
Yes, in cases where you've tried to sustain a residence involvement scheme and it's died, have you got any examples where you've tried to resurrect any of these schemes and it's been successful at all?
The example I was talking about earlier about the Gateway Committee is that it basically dissolved itself, and that's in our rules, so they had to do a major review. But it was something that was different, so it was what's lessons learned, and it was things like, which picked up on Lee's point, that there were long meetings, there weren't actually any decisions coming out of it, and so it was much more focused, and people could see the advantage of doing it. I think that we all can get into a habit of saying, oh, we need another meeting, and it became a bit of a hamster wheel that, you know, there's a meeting this week, or there's a meeting next week, and so doing that, and it was a really hard decision, because it literally was in the rules, and we had to have a special general meeting, which our members had to make a decision, first to dissolve it and then to put in a new structure. The new structure is more, it's a smaller group, and it's more defined, their terms of reference.
The one example I can think of with the tenant management organisation was where they had accrued a large surplus for the number of properties that were involved, and we just had to tell them, well, if you do fold, that's all coming back to the council. And in fact, the threat of council management again was usually enough to generate enough people to come forward. The other thing, there's two other points I would quickly make though, is one, with TRAs, often you will find that the whole involvement is a cyclical process. And new ones will come up, and sometimes you just let some of the old ones go, and in a year or two's time they may come on board again. That's, you know, a natural cycle. The final point being that increasingly people are unwilling to give an open-ended commitment to something. So if you have a time-limited project which may incorporate someone's specific skills, that's a good use of their time, and they may be more inclined to say, yeah, I'll get involved with that, because they can see an end to their involvement.
Yeah, very quickly, I've been in two minds on this. Sometimes I think you've just got to let things die rather than flog a dead horse. But if it's something crucial, I can think of one example. All our customer-facing areas have a task group attached to it where staff and residents work together. Our communications one was falling apart. It's entirely down to staff administration of it. My absolute bugbear is for resident groups, papers being sent out the day before, or people being told the week before that there's a meeting next week. This, you know, I'm glad to say this isn't common practice at Amicus Horizon, but we wonder why things like that fall apart. And in that case, that was the reason.
Just to add to that, thinking about renewal, so it's sustainability, but renewal as in bringing new people in, and particularly where people are involved in the actual running of things. Do you have anything built in, any structures built in to ensure renewal? Because if you've got, have you got time limits on boards and ways of, you know, a sort of system for bringing in new people?
In both our board and our gateway, it's 3 times 3 years, so the most that people can be is 9 years, and you'll get some natural fallout as well. So it's important that we look at succession planning, and we spend, particularly the communities team, spend a lot of time talking to people, because that's really important, understanding what they want to do, and then, you know, finding those, we were talking about it and call those hidden gems, those people that may not have been involved before, and working with them in terms of training, seeing what they can do at the trust. And it may be it's a journey. People may not straight want to go to the gateway, or they may not want to go straight to the board, but actually if they get involved with the trust, they can see, yes, I can add value there. To be honest, this year we also used UK Engage, and I'd give them a big plug. I think they do some really good work, and they've worked with us in terms of getting new people, and the plan is that we carry on that on a quarterly basis. It's not just a one-off, it's actually something you always look at.
I think that's right, and when you also have the, if you like, extracurricular activities going on, as officers, you keep a little list of people who you think will be useful in the future. And you look at all the activities. On one estate, a Domino's club brought in a particular section of the community, and we were able to tap into that. In others, the gardening club has produced similar effects, or we got funding, one of our TMOs got funding from the Moroccan embassy for after-school classes in Arabic. This was in North Kensington, to reconnect families with their heritage and their cultural roots. And again, people turning up to pick their kids up from the after-school club, you start engaging, and then you come back to them at a later point.
Yeah, just really quickly, I'd echo that. We're working on succession. Actually, our governance review has just introduced the 9-year rule, 3 by 3 by 3 terms for our area panels, but with a soft landing, a 2-year transition phase, because God forbid we'll lose all these fantastic people who have a wealth of experience very suddenly, and we don't want to do that. So we're working like crazy over the next 2 years to make sure we've got that bank of talent coming in.
Thanks for that, Peter.
This may sound like a heretical question to 3 evangelists who've clearly got very robust arrangements and very, But I wondered what you'd all say to sort of new ideas of resident involvement around, for example, first, more of an emphasis on consulting people via the internet and getting customer feedback that way remotely, where residents can, if you like, control the agenda much more from their own homes. Second, working in areas with people who aren't necessarily your tenants or residents, but who are part very much of the community that your tenants and residents live in. So the resident involvement is not about ownership, it's about community. And the third one really is working on agendas which are not housing agendas, but might be more to do with health or other qualities of the life in a particular area.
In terms of the wider agenda, yeah, with all the cuts that are coming through into local government in particular, those other parts of the public sector are looking for ways in to communicate. So there's a lot of options available or becoming available for joint initiatives. In terms of the wider community, my feelings have always been that as a TRA, your constitution can range as wide as possible. If you want to have it wider than your estate or block and have the neighbouring, that's fine, that's down to you. Whereas a landlord, I start imposing some restrictions is how you interact with me. So if you're coming into some of our panels which have budgetary decisions to make, then it's not appropriate from someone who isn't our tenant to influence those. But if you want a community-wide structure, absolutely go for it. Don't stick just to your estate boundaries.
In terms of the online, we now have Gateway Voices, which is our Facebook, and it's not the Trust Facebook page, it's actually a page where people are starting to engage with us more, and we want to use that for very instant discussions about service improvement. It is very early stages, it's probably 6 to 8 months we've been there, and that's looked after by our communities team. As I've said before, it is about better homes, friendlier communities, so we encourage that throughout, and that also involves our membership. We have associate members, and they are people that live and work in our community. They don't have all the they can't vote, for example, but they can be members of our Gateway membership team. And actually, when it was failing, the group decided that a better way of involving the community was to encourage associate members. In terms of the wider agenda, particularly in terms of health, we are now working with the local CCG, and we are hosting a community navigator who is working sort of the housing and health agenda, and again helping GPs, because a lot of people come to GPs isn't about their health, it's actually about a whole range of different issues, and as a community organisation we can signpost those patients to other people, and a lot of the things that we're finding actually impact on us as housing. There's a lot of issue with hoarders that are coming through that route. So it's a small part, but it's something that we're looking at.
Thanks. Yeah, we haven't ventured into community leadership or citizenship models yet. It sounds interesting. We are constantly looking for new ways to engage residents. We're looking at online forums. We do Facebook, we do Twitter. My only slight concern is that if you're wanting residents to come in and shape your services and drive improvement, I think I'm yet to be convinced that that can be done quite easily online. There are ways of involving people online, but it rolls off the top very nicely. When it comes to actually making sure that scrutiny happens and that improvement happens as a result, then I'm yet to quite make the link, but I'd be up for it if someone could prove it to me.
Any more questions from colleagues? Shirley?
I'm just thinking about how much does it cost? All this brilliant resident involvement, and you've talked about some of the cost benefits, but number crunching, how many dedicated staff? You heard, we heard about the really quite new Hammersmith and Fulham team. They're very stretched, they're recruiting more. How many dedicated staff do you think are needed to actually really make something like this work?
I've just moved to my infographic in the report that says we made 2,763,000 savings through resident involvement over the last few years. And of course, there's a cost to it. We've got, probably compared to other large London associations, quite a big team. We've got around, across the 3 regions, we've got around 10 on resident involvement. We've got further staff involved on the resident governance side. I think it's worth it, but we are looking to make efficiencies, and we're talking to residents about how we make those efficiencies. And of course, there's some great ideas coming forward, but we have to make it a wee bit cheaper. It's not something we're going to throw out and just say it doesn't matter anymore, because we're convinced we still get the savings as a result, but we will be looking to go downwards.
I haven't got quite as detailed figures, unfortunately, but within the tenant management section within Southwark, we have a team of 9, which is quite large, as I say, for what we do. But over the past 5 years, our TMOs have increased their surpluses in the region of £3 million based on what we've given them. So that's £3 million which are now being programmed to be ploughed back into the estates. That's on top of what they've been spending anyway from their day-to-day budgets, which I haven't got a sum for, unfortunately.
In our rules, we have a requirement to have a community gateway, and we also have in our rules that we will spend at least £295,000 per annum, that was in 2007, on community empowerment, and a lot of that is on staffing. Things have changed, and I know when the Commission came to visit us, they looked at one of our community hubs. So our pure community empowerment team is a team leader and 2 community officers, but we also have in that, and a manager, but we also have in that team our community hubs team, because actually we think that we can involve more people by using our assets, and we have in our 20 areas we have 80% have got community hubs, so we've got a team of 3 for that as well.
Well, Tina, Lee and Kate, this has been a fascinating session. It's been genuinely educational for us and thought-provoking and very stimulating, and you leave many questions that we might be inclined to go on with. However, since this is Hammersmith and Fulham and emphatically not Lambeth, I propose to finish on time. But one of the conclusions that I think does emerge from what you said, amongst many of the other issues, is that whatever structures we recommend, we want to make sure that there are some quick wins for our residents, so they see some immediate benefit out of what we propose. But there's a lot to think about. We are immensely grateful to you for the time you've given, the journeyings you've made to get here, and we'd like to express our thanks to you in the usual fashion. Thank you all very much indeed.